Hi, this is Dr. Justina Agnieszka Chevalier. In this video, based on chapter 12 of my book, Non-Selective Survival versus Hyper-Selective Mating, I will actually describe what it translates into when on a given area in epidemiology, humans incessantly kill animals to serve as only option for food in fast food chains and restaurants, impeding by prices access to non-pesticides foods, reserving such for privileged groups by pricing also, and reserving food sources and areas to the outside providers outside of the United States, while having local providers infringed in such provision. Well, it takes a strong leader that we choose to change such by an imposition of a policy on a corporation such as McDonald's that ignored me as human rights activist in asking to introduce at least one vegan burger or one vegan shake for persons who unfortunately, despite the propaganda on the radio, still are in majority sufferers of hypertension, obesity and incapacity due to the slaughter of animals lacking other sources of food. Well, in unfortunately the area, it is as cause and effect what we call crimes of passion. Are crimes because of enforcing, mimicking the model of a cow fertilized by sticks or by bull by force, relationships in which sex is exchangeable for work, and ignoring work of any other nature that has actually content like my work, and placing a condition on that as price. That is, as cause effect, again, direct effect of meat industry. Second important thing to note is that it takes Surgeon General to issue a policy that on a remote, especially area, when there is nothing to eat, or area that is impossible, impeded by prohibitions to walk on, limiting persons' existence to vehicles in majority of spaces, and walking is labeled as abnormal, leading to secondary loss of muscle mass and disability, to fuel money only in gyms and also in exercises that are ineffective, because from the standpoint of survival they do not actually play any role whatsoever, are just vain movements, that's it, that body is resistant to do, as opposed to using as if it was in a developing country not only public transport but also open to walk, pavements and areas to move from work to home and from one place to another, which makes then the muscles purposefully developing. And that is also to food sources and water sources. When in the area persons are confined to vehicles and the only source of food is killed cow and chicken, suffering someone in closed up facility, that is reflected in exact same, first of all, impediments to fertility, such as in vitro fertilization, surrogate mothers and asexual marriages that are enforced to enable labor, family being prerequisite of that. And secondly, also in crimes. And so I would like to discuss some of the forensics, because I'm a physician that has particular passion for forensics since medical school, and also background because I went to law school prior to that in Europe, in law, especially in human rights since high school, because I was a finalist in human rights when I was in high school, despite a sabotage in which I did not receive even questions for that Olympics. Well, to know such, for example, let's take what is done by Illuminatti. Illuminati that used to be a movement that consisted of enlightenment and persons that used empathy and intellect, became actually a movement in which persons are captured and volunteer to have incisions done similar to those done in chickens, and also tattoos similar to those done in cows, and rapes similar to forceful fertilization done to breeding dogs and also to meat industry. And that is done nowadays, and for some is considered an item. Well, to be sure, intellect is to plan ahead such activity in which supply of goods in the area and such distribution, as well as enforced instead of pricey treatments and damage to reputation, to promote less difficult to manipulate persons in places of significance, using things like treatments for addiction, while there is stash of lying, marijuana and cigarettes and alcohol, to actually generate seeking instincts, the same as meat, impeding persons and then labeling persons as abnormal, to sell medication, while the Surgeon General refused also to participate in provision of food that is healthy as primary source of nutrition based on, let's be conservative, just a simple nutrition pyramid. In major food sources and for prices accessible to others. That results, ladies and gentlemen, in death. And that is grounds to remove such official from that position just based off ignoring me or other human rights activists. Responding to a question of a police officer from Port Angeles. Human rights activism consists of civic action and education of persons, as well as petitions to remove persons who impede morality and normalization of environment to benefit all without exception, and the use of intellect to empathy pursue no harm to any other species, including humans, so that humans do not have urge to self-destroy or destroy others, impeded then by medication that can only lead to chronicity and death and vegetative states, and impeding also regeneration. And that is done, ladies and gentlemen, by promoting teaching and promoting information, as well as deoccupying of illegal institutions and civic institutions from persons who use law to kill and impede functioning to the maximum potential of all of other persons. And that is done nowadays in institutions such as DMV, banks, as well as in places that sell accommodation and food industry. And there is no one who wins at that. Absolutely no one. Because survival in bouts leads to painful death, such as in Acoma City, one of the Native Americans told me, "Keres," which means, do you want cruel death? And that is what you do to the animals, the smaller ones. And the smallest ones and other humans will be actually imprinted in your weakness to impede you from doing such, and slow the generation in capacity to enjoy those goods, as well as, unfortunately, progressive death, often sedation being only option because of lack of knowledge and lack of actually human rights action and participation, collaboration instead of brutalities. Second, apart from Illuminatti, instead of empathy that excludes none and use of intellect to improve skills, to include all in calculations, in distribution of goods, so that there is no aggression and there is no omission and safety. Second, the example of encarving what is done to animals are also, for example, strippers in Club Chicks. A club that is actually not only African American, placed in Killing, Houston, and has females nicknames by chicks, the same as chicks, sold by $5, performing acts in actually resentment and impediment to pursue work, and as only alternative given only disability, in lack of or complete ignorance to the person's talents, education and willingness to do any other job, to amusement of many males who do not feel more than vendettas for divorces in which lawyers collect to distribute alimonies from men impeded from pursuit on another family and females impeded from not only work because of those alimonies, but also from having a developed career. Divorce, based on Declaration of Rights of Women, actually, ladies and gentlemen, predisposes to development of career as opposed to its cessation and impediment, basing on family presence or some sort of degree of sexuality, salary, or independent living. Many persons, I can name now, are impeded from divorce and are brutally violated at home for purpose of appearance. Many persons also, historically, who had PhD from Princeton, were physicians or PhD level nurses and females, were pushed after divorce to become destitute by impediments to access own funds and use obtained during marriage skills in non-stop evocation of guilt or blaming, to not to endure mimicking Christ's passion or Mary Magdalene a sexual life while husband had other preferences, which, let's remember, sex is source of children and requirement to have a marriage, also legally. All those things are very important and within my interest. So please, this is a call for action. If you are, for example, in a legal limbo in which a civil administrative refuses you accommodation other than hotel to fuel a huge income for persons like Donald Trump and others in Airbnb and hotels, and a constant perpetuated status of a traveler, by a requirement of having an address to have an access to bank accounts and bank services and to lease an apartment, which is a nonsense because the requirement in the future applied for to apply for it and obtain it is what is not obtained yet, and it is impossible actually to obtain it even with utmost assistance of police officials, an active sabotage and a ridicule of United States law as sign of Declaration of Human Rights and Declaration of Rights of Women. Who is at fault? At fault is, ladies and gentlemen, resentment and ignorance. Let's change it, please, and let's start to form unions also. I met many persons who assisted me and I am very grateful. However, I do not want to rely as if a dog on accommodations that are group or Airbnb in persons that charge $900 per room, as reported by me to FBI, for an accommodation in which a person does not pursue provision of even basic cleaning of a facility or kitchen, while persons who are workers or who have funds and education to pursue such are impeded from use of own skills to obtain an income and from actually pursuit of use of that salary to have an independent living accommodation, while person wants to reserve a larger house without being forced to rent it to others short term for self. To fulfill requirements, it needs to be adjusted for greatest good in those requirements, case by case basis, and in group of pressure, group of resistance that I'm trying to form here, which persons are actually, for example, as I was in North Dakota, forced out of access to bank account to rent with having and actually funds own apartment and pursue employment in that area because of divorce, and forced on group facilities, jails or mental health institutions, and sexual harassment based on chance that is not in intentions of persons who stop, but in a doing of a system that self-sabotages all of us because of what we do to animals. I am not per se animal rights activist. I am a physician and human rights activist, patient advocate. However, what we do to animals, also encarved in women from Ciudad Juarez, is not ritualistic murder. It is actually collecting in meat, in pounds of humans, in females who create the demand for chickens, in injuries anonymously, what we do to birds to die of obesity and have childhood obesity also on border between Mexico and the United States on both areas. It is international. Second example that lacks that mystery that we seek on in many of the programs are serial killings. Serial killings are simply eliminating persons because of swapping based on desired characteristics of most wanted relationships to another and yet another person, while that person then impedes relationship, pursuing attention to present self as pursued or stalked for gain.